Picture this. It's the first of the month in New York, Saigon, Buenos Aires, Berlin. Your salary drops into your account, the notification pops up. That number on the screen feels like a life raft. Rent, school fees, parents' medicine, the tiny slice you hope to save for later. Your whole life, you've been told the same comforting story. Keep your money in the bank, buy government bonds, trust the national currency. This money is safe. The state guarantees it. That's how responsible adults do finance. But when you walk into the supermarket, the story starts to crack. Groceries cost more than last year. Rent crept up again. Gas is higher. School fees went up. A little bit, because inflation. Your paycheck number got bigger too. But somehow, in the real world, your money feels more tired than ever. Friends shrug. It's just inflation. That's normal. Central banks know what they're doing. The financial influencers say, don't worry, modern currencies are stable. We have tools now. That kind of collapse only happens in crazy places. And for over 50 years, since the world quietly cut the last link between money and gold, almost nobody sat you down and explained what that change really did to the thing you work for every day. You were lulled to sleep by a very pretty story about money. Our currency is strong, our central bank is independent, your savings are safe. The numbers in your app cooperate with that story. They behave. They go up in neat lines. But if you zoom out and let history talk, the cash in your pocket has a secret file with your name on it, and it doesn't read safety. Rome, Spain, revolutionary France, Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe. On maps and in textbooks, they're just chapters. In real life, they were millions of families watching the numbers they trusted slowly detach from reality. Currencies didn't die there as a cinematic explosion. They died the way concrete bridges die. A bit of rust, a bit of stress, hairline cracks covered with fresh paint, until one day a bus drives across and the whole thing gives way. Before we walk into those stories, ask a question nobody really asked you in school. What is a currency to you personally? Not to an economist, not to a central bank, to you. It's not a unit of account, a medium of exchange, a store of value on a multiple-choice test. It's the container that holds years of your life. 10 hours in a hospital shift, 30 days on a construction site, 15 years building a small business, poured into digits, notes, balances. You accept that transformation because everyone around you accepts the same deal. If I give the system my time today, this currency will let me get real life back later. When a currency works, it protects that transformation. When a currency dies, it doesn't just move lines on a chart. It reaches backward in time and steals work you've already done. Now go back almost 2,000 years, not to memorize dates, but to sit beside one ordinary couple whose lives will feel uncomfortably familiar. Somewhere on a cold northern frontier of the Roman Empire, a soldier named Marcus stands in line for his pay. His feet ache from marching. His shield is nicked. He's thinking about his wife, Livia, and their children back in the city. The officer counts a small pile of denarii into his hands, silver coins stamped with the emperor's head. These are not abstract money supply. For Marcus, each coin is a concrete promise. Bread, oil, sandals, a small plot of land when his fighting days are over. He closes his fist around them and feels safe. Weeks later, Livia visits the same market she has gone to for years. Same baker, same smell of warm bread. She hands over the familiar denarii and waits for the usual nod. Instead, the baker hesitates, pushes a few coins back and says, "Prices went up. I need more. Flour costs me more now." Livia blinks. Same bread. Same husband. Doing the same dangerous work. Same coin design. Same emperor's proud profile. Yet somehow, the same effort now buys less life. Nobody sent them a warning saying, "By the way, we are quietly changing the money." But that's exactly what Rome has done. To pay for distant campaigns, public baths, circuses, swollen bureaucracy, and the endless political need to buy loyalty, Roman emperors discovered a dangerous trick. Melt the coins and add base metal. Where 1,000 nearly pure silver coins used to exist, they can now mint 1,500 lighter coins. On the surface, nothing changes. The name, denarius, is the same. The symbols are the same. The empire tells its citizens, "This coin is worth what it always was. Trust us." Under the surface, Each unit holds less and less real value. It is the ancient version of turning on the printing press, except the press is a mint, and the lie is hidden in the metal. At first, only careful merchants notice that some coins are lighter, that the ring against the table sounds off. Prices creep up unevenly. People with good information start hoarding older, heavier coins in clay pots and paying with the cheap ones. The bad money chases out the good. Everyday Romans like Marcus and Livia don't read imperial edicts about monetary policy. They just experience the feeling you know all too well. We work as hard as ever, but life is getting more expensive. The Emperor Diocletian eventually responds with rage and rules, a massive list of maximum prices, threatening punishment for those who charge too much. It's a familiar theater. The state blames greedy merchants, speculators, foreigners. But you can't threaten basic arithmetic into obedience. If each coin is secretly worth less, and you don't allow prices to rise, goods simply disappear from shelves and flow into black markets. If you could stop the video here and walk through the crowd with a microphone, most Romans would describe their problem as rising prices or shortages. Very few would say, our currency is being quietly hollowed out to plug an impossible budget. That as the first uncomfortable echo with your life. You were told your problem is a bit of inflation, supply chain issues, temporary shocks. The deeper story, too many political promises sitting on top of the same real economy, almost never makes it into the official script. Now shift forward a millennium to Golden Age Spain, the 1500s, the original superpower. A merchant named Diego wakes in Seville, walks to his window, and sees the masts of the treasure fleet rising over the harbor. Galleons have crossed the Atlantic with their bellies full of silver from Potosi and gold from conquered lands. Priests give thanks. Courtiers toast the king. The whole empire tells itself, we are rich. Look at all this money. Diego has lent to the crown, holds stacks of royal bonds, keeps careful ledgers of what towns and nobles owe him. On parchment, he is wealthy beyond his father's dreams. But something slow and strange is happening under his feet. The price of bread doesn't double overnight, it drifts. 2 maravedis becomes 3, then 4. Meat, oil, cloth, one by one, basic goods demand more coins. Wages lag behind. The influx of silver has flooded Europe's money supply far faster than farms, workshops, and mines can expand real production. Put in modern terms, it's as if a central bank has discovered the print button, but not the brake. In court, the king uses new silver to pay for wars, ships, palaces, to outsource manufacturing to other lands instead of building a competitive domestic base. Why reform taxes or cut spending when a new fleet always seems to be on the horizon? Diego feels rich because the numbers in his ledgers are big and official. Yet the true yardstick of his life, what those numbers buy, is shrinking. More disturbing, the safest asset he owns, the IOU of the Spanish crown, quietly mutates from a rock to quicksand. Under the surface of glory and gold, Spain is learning a cruel lesson. More money is not the same as more wealth. For the common person, the silver boom is a stealth tax that eats wages and savings. For the state, it's a drug. Each dose makes reform less likely. If you replace silver from the New World with cheap credit, QE, or deficit spending, how different does that story really feel from headlines you scroll past today? Nominal GDP goes up, asset prices rise, stock indices hit records, governments boast about growth, while the real experience on the street is, everything important is more expensive, and my pay is chasing it. Spain eventually defaults again and again on its debts. Bondholders discover that what felt like unquestionable safety was just delayed pain. That, as the quiet rule financial history keeps handing you. Anything backed by a government can look safer for longer than it really is, right up until the moment the political cost of honesty is higher than the cost of sacrificing you. Now cross to late 18th century France, a country exploding with ideas and rage. The monarchy is bankrupt. Years of war and bad taxes have bled the treasury dry. Revolution breaks out. The king's head falls. In the vacuum, a new government has a radical solution. It seizes the immense land holdings of the church and says, we will turn this land, the property of the nation, into backing for a new modern currency. They print paper notes called assignats, decorated with revolutionary symbols. On day one, the story is seductive. This is not irresponsible printing, they insist. This money is backed by real land, by the people's wealth. A village schoolteacher named Etienne receives his salary in these crisp notes. He is not an economist. He is simply relieved that after chaos and bloodshed, there is a medium that lets him feed his family and pay for candles. At first, shopkeepers take assignats without complaint. Prices wobble, but life goes on. The government promises to limit issuance. Then reality barges in. Wars on multiple fronts, counter-revolution, broken tax systems, expenses tower over income. In smoky rooms in Paris, officials watch the gap widen and tell themselves, "We have one more lever. We can print more assignats. It's temporary. Once things stabilize, we'll pull money back in." The printing presses speed up. More paper chases the same bread, the same barrels of wine, the same wool and grain. The official narrative stays soothing. The currency's backing is still land, they say. Blame speculators, hoarders, foreign enemies for rising prices. Back in Etienne's village, the baker doesn't read revolutionary speeches. She just knows that flour costs more every month, so she raises prices to survive. Etienne's salary is adjusted upward, but each raise lags behind reality. Paydays become a moment of anxiety. Will this stack of notes actually get us through the week? As the flood of paper grows, people do what humans have always done. They adapt. Some refuse assignats and demand coin or goods. Some instantly convert paper into anything real. Tools, livestock, foreign currency, gold. The government responds with force. Maximum price laws, denunciations, arrests. On the street, fear mixes with absurdity. An assignat that said 100 last year can buy only a handful of onions now. Eventually, the notes collapse in value so completely that even the revolutionaries abandon them. Etienne, who trusted that a salary backed by the nation's land meant stability, finds his life savings reduced to decorative wallpaper. The lesson isn't paper money is evil or gold is magic. The lesson is nastier. When a state discovers it can print away its short-term pain, it almost always tells itself a comforting story while it does it. It's backed by land. It's backed by the productive capacity of our modern economy. It's temporary. It's under control. The story lasts just long enough for ordinary savers to be trapped. Now go to Berlin 1923 and sit down at a kitchen table with Hans and Greta. On their wall hangs a framed war bond, promoted in posters as the patriotic, honorable way to invest. In a drawer lies a savings book with columns of careful deposits from before and after the First World War. The state, the newspapers, the local banker all told them the same thing you hear today. Government paper is risk-free, saving in the national currency is responsible, the system will take care of those who do their duty. After the war, Germany faces reparations, political chaos, and a state budget that simply doesn't add up. Instead of defaulting openly or slashing spending, the government leans harder on the Reichsbank. More marks are issued to pay salaries, pensions, war debts. Early on, inflation feels like an annoyance, not a catastrophe. Prices are higher than last year. Wages catch up. People grumble, adjust, carry on. Then the spiral tightens. Businesses raise prices in anticipation of higher costs. Workers demand bigger increases because they know that by the time their next raise comes, living expenses will have jumped again. The government prints more to keep up with its own obligations. Each feedback loop turns faster. The mark's function as a store of value dissolves. By 1923, Hans's wage is technically high, but reality has turned upside down. On payday, Greta doesn't leave the money in the bank. She meets Hans at the factory, snatches the envelope of notes, and rushes to the market. If she waits until afternoon, merchants will have rewritten their chalkboard prices twice. Savings die in real time. Children play with bundles of notes. People paste banknotes as wallpaper because the paper is worth more as decoration than as legal tender. There are photographs of workers being paid twice a day and spouses waiting at the gate with baskets, of a wheelbarrow of cash being dumped on a counter and still not equaling the cost of a loaf of bread. Hans and Greta weren't speculators. They weren't greedy. They were exactly the kind of patient, conservative savers every government claims to admire. They didn't default on anyone. The system defaulted on them through their currency. Their war bond is honored in the most technical sense. It's repayable in marks, but those marks can to buy shoes for their child. On paper, they did everything their nation asked. In practice, they financed the collapse of their own financial security. Fast forward again to Zimbabwe, early 2000s. A school teacher named Memory stands in front of a blackboard teaching children sums in a currency that is about to make arithmetic meaningless. Land seizures and political decisions have gutted production. Tax revenues melt. The government prints money to fill the gap. One salary, then the next, then the next. Each comes with more zeros than the last. $10,000, 1 million, 100 million, 1 billion, 100 trillion. The notes look impressive, almost comical to outsiders. Tourists frame them. Social media eventually turns them into jokes. For Memory, there is nothing funny. Her payday becomes a race against the clock. She leaves school, runs to the shops, watches prices being updated by hand. By the time she reaches the front of the line, the amount scribbled on the board has jumped. The stack of notes in her hand has quietly shrunk. Sometimes she can't afford basic staples even with $1 trillion in her purse. Eventually, shops demand US dollars or rand. The Zimbabwean dollar is quietly abandoned, the ultimate humiliation for a national currency. Imagine waking up and discovering that the money of your childhood, with your own coat of arms on it, has been exiled from real life. The world laughs at screenshots of $100 trillion bills. Memory has to explain to her children why there is food missing from the table. At this point, it is tempting to protect yourself with a sentence you've probably heard. Those are extreme cases. That can't happen in a modern, advanced, well-managed country like mine. But that is exactly what people in those stories believed. Pre-war Germans saw themselves as educated, industrial, civilized. Spanish nobles believed in their empire's special destiny. Revolutionary French thought they were inventing a rational, enlightened order. Nobody tattoos future hyperinflation zone on their flag. The bridge always looks solid until it doesn't. Now comes the subtler twist, the one that really concerns you. Not every currency dies in a blaze of hyperinflation. Many die in a long, mild fever that never makes the front page. In 1971, when the United States closed the gold window and the last formal link between major currencies and gold disappeared, we entered a giant experiment, money backed solely by confidence, law, and political promise. Since then, year after year, most major currencies have lost purchasing power steadily. You don't see wheelbarrows, so it feels harmless. But do the compounding. A little, 2 to 3% official inflation, over 30 or 40 years, quietly cuts the real value of a saver's money in half or worse. Think of someone retiring in 1970 with a nest egg that could buy a house in a decent neighborhood outright. Roll that nominal sum forward to today, without heroic investment returns, and see what it buys. Maybe a down payment, maybe a used car, maybe just a decade of modest rent. The currency did not hyperinflate. It never collapsed in the dramatic sense. Yet the container that was supposed to hold decades of sacrifice slowly leaked. You're told this is acceptable, even desirable. Central banks openly say, we target 2% inflation. Translated into human language, we consider it healthy if your money loses roughly a quarter of its purchasing power every decade, as long as it happens quietly. Put it this way, if a private company offered to store your possessions and said, our terms are great, we only throw away 30 to 50% of your stuff over the next 30-40 years, you'd walk out. When a monetary authority says essentially the same thing in more polite words, most people nod and call that stability. And here is where history slams straight into your future. In every case we've walked through, the largest losses fell not on the reckless gamblers, but on the ordinary savers who trusted the story the longest. So what should you do with this? Not panic, not run to the nearest bunker, not bet everything on one shiny object. History doesn't hand you a magic asset that is always safe. What it does offer is a different habit of mind. First, stop confusing legal guarantee with real-world safety. Spain guaranteed its royal debts until it didn't. France backed assignats with real land right up until it printed so many that the connection became a joke. Weimar's war bonds were backed by the full faith and credit of the German state at the exact moment that state was destroying its own credit with ink. Zimbabwe printed $100 trillion down on a piece of paper as if zeros could replace farms that no longer produced. When you see the phrase risk-free next to the words government bond or bank deposit, remember that what's being promised is nominal repayment, not purchasing power. Second, start asking the questions almost nobody on TV asks on your behalf. Not, will the central bank cut or raise next month? But, at my personal level, are the so-called safe returns on my cash beating, matching, or losing to the real price rises in my life? Not, is my government big and powerful? But, how mathematically realistic are the promises being made in this currency? How many pensions, benefits, wars, bailouts, subsidies, tax cuts, and grand projects are stacked on the same monetary base? And how do policymakers talk about paying for them? With growth and hard choices, or with phrases like, we can always issue more of our own currency? Third, recognize the emotional trap that destroyed Hans, Greta, Memory, Diego, Etienne, Marcus, and Livia. The fear of looking stupid in the short term. In almost every currency crisis, there were people who moved some wealth out of the system early, who diversified, who refused to keep all their life savings in the exact instrument the state wanted them to hold. They were mocked as pessimists, gold bugs, disloyal, paranoid. When the bridge gave way, they were rebranded as lucky. Their real advantage wasn't luck. It was that they allowed financial history to embarrass them before the crowd did. Finally, bring this all the way back to your next conversation with money. When your uncle says, just keep it in cash, that's safe. When a banker slides across a brochure that says, principal guaranteed by the government. When a politician tells you, we'll spend more, tax less, print a bit, keep rates low, and nothing bad will happen. Don't argue. Don't scream hyperinflation. Don't forward scary charts. Just quietly put those sentences next to the stories in this video. Put, this time is different, next to Imperial Rome shaving silver, Spain drowning in treasure and still defaulting, France printing backed by land notes into oblivion, respectable Germans carrying wages in baskets, a Zimbabwean teacher holding a note with trillion written on it that can buy dinner. Then look back at your own balances, the digits representing decades of your time, and ask yourself one private question. If this currency in this system ever starts down the same path, would I see it early enough to act? Or would I be like Hans and Greta, believing right up until the last minute that the state will take care of people like us? Because that is what, when currencies die, the silent killer of nations is really about. Not doom, not drama for its own sake, but the one form of protection almost nobody offers you. Memory. The ability to see that the normal of your lifetime is only a tiny slice of a much messier pattern. The next time you hear, money in the bank is safe, the state stands behind it. Inflation is under control. Just trust the system and focus on your career. Remember Rome's shrinking silver, Spain's rotting treasure, France's beautiful but worthless paper, Germany's wheelbarrows, Zimbabwe's glittering zeros. Remember that the people who suffered most in those stories looked and sounded exactly like you. Responsible, hardworking, trying to do the right thing with their savings. If this helped you see your own currency a little more clearly, not as a law of nature, but as a human promise that can be bent, stretched, and sometimes broken, then Donati, let it be the last time you look at markets through the eyes of financial history instead of marketing. There will be more headlines about debt ceilings, crises, bailouts, new programs paid for by creative accounting. There will be more soothing press conferences. If you want someone whispering, we've seen this script before, here's how it ended last time. Every time the story starts to repeat, you know what to do.